Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Today we're going to be taking a look at these 4 figures produced by ERTL for the Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock movie. Now ERTL is not a company that I associate with making action figures. They're best known to me for making model kits and die-cast toys, but they thought they would have a go at producing these 4 figures for the Star Trek 3 movie. Now that's because Star Trek 2 The Wrath of Khan had done really well, and no one had produced any toys particularly for that movie, so they thought they would produce some for Star Trek 3, which turned out to be a bit of a duff movie, much like the motion picture beforehand, because Mego had produced a line of toys for that, and that movie again didn't do particularly well, so the figures really didn't do well either, which is always such a shame. But ERTL did actually a pretty good job with these, so let's take a closer look at the figures and see what they did right and also what they did wrong. ERTL only produced 4 figures from the movie, 3 Enterprise crew and 1 Klingon. Now the Enterprise crew we get are Kirk, as you can see here, and that's actually not a too bad likeness for him. It's a little bit on the skinny side, but it sort of looks like Kirk. Then we have Spock, which I think is a better likeness. You can see there. Now this one has a bit of green paint on it. I'm not actually sure whether that was on the original toy or something a child has put on. So if you do know that, do drop me a line. If it's something someone's put on, I will remove it. But this is the only figure I've ever owned of Spock from the Star Trek 3 movie, so I'm not quite sure. But the likeness is pretty reasonable. And then we have Scotty. Let's look at that one. Again, not too bad. That's a little bit generic. Again, could do with being a little bit fatter, but a little bit generic. And finally, we have what ERTL classed as the Klingon leader, but is actually Krug, which is the sort of captain of the Klingon vessel, played by Christopher Lloyd in the movie. Not too bad. Actually does look like a Klingon, and the outfit is pretty reasonable. Now these figures are certainly better than the Mego ones that were produced for the motion picture, because these are much more like G.I. Joe figures. So there's quite a lot of articulation. You can rotate them round, the shoulders bend in and out, the elbows bend there, you can also bend at the knees, and it has a separate sort of waist connection. Again, this is the same construction as the G.I. Joe figure, so you've got a little metal pin that goes across and then an O-ring that goes up into the centre of the body. So they're actually quite a nice construction, and the sculpt on them is not too bad. It's quite a sort of childlike sculpt, but I quite like it. Now they did get a little bit lazy when it comes to the bridge crew, because the bridge crew all have exactly the same body. If I just bring up 2 of them here, you can see that the casting and moulding is the same on all the figures. The only thing they've done slightly differently is on Scotty. They've put a bit of a yellow trim on him opposed to the white trim that Spock and Kirk have on that side. And as you can see, they do come with weapons, but they don't hold them particularly well. Spock and Scotty both come with phaser pistols, as you can see here. Let's take one of them out. This is a fairly simple sculpt, and it's reasonable in detail. The only problem with it is that it's a little bit too large for the figure, and also doesn't want to sit in the hands particularly well, so you spend a lot of time trying to get them to hold these weapons without them dropping them. Scotty is particularly bad. The figure there, it keeps falling out of his hand, which is why I'm not moving him. And Kirk also comes with a little tricorder, a very simple little model. It's just a sort of grey oblong with some lines on the top of it. That actually holds in his hand a bit better, just because you can sort of jam it in between his thumb. But again, quite a simple thing and a little bit oversized, but it does work quite well. Now the Klingon comes with a monster dog, and that is how it's described on the packaging. This one, much like my Spock, I think has actually been painted by a child, because it should just be a plain grey colour. So this is something I need to work on in the future and remove the paint from to get it looking back to original. I think at some point a child has painted with I would say some enamel paints or something on this, just to add a bit more detail to it, because I can't believe they would release a toy with this sort of bad paint application. The actual sculpt underneath is quite nice. There's a lot of detail to it, and it's made out of a sort of rubbery sort of material, so I reckon at some point I will need to clean it up, much like I need to do with Spock's face. But so it means that the Klingon doesn't have any weapon, he just has his monster dog, so a little bit of a strange accessory there, but it sort of works, and you do see this in the movie, so it's another sort of nice feature, because this is something that you do see in the film. I think it's only fair to compare these figures to the ones that Mego produced, because I think the likenesses that Mego got on the heads were an awful lot better than the ones that ERTL have done. So I'm going to bring in, this is an original motion picture version of Kirk, and you can see I think the Mego one still looks a lot better. The one that ERTL have produced has got a really sort of quite a bad suntan going on, and the flesh tones look a bit odd, and it's also a little bit too thin for my liking. We can do the same with Spock. The Spock head that ERTL produced is not too bad, but I think the one that Mego did is still loads better. There's so much more detail on it and it really does look like Spock. But again, it's not a bad likeness. Certainly does the job. And then we'll look at Scotty as well. Now this one, I think the original Mego one certainly is loads better. There's just something about the way that they've got his face. It just looks really like Scotty, whereas the ERTL one is just a bit generic and again has got a bit of a suntan going on. But still, it's not a bad job. I just think Mego did it better. As I mentioned earlier, the main bridge crew all use the same sculpt on the body, and it is quite a nice sculpt. There's a lot of detail going on. I like the little emblem, the little Starfleet logo on it, and the little sort of details on the shoulders and the sort of woolen neckline that they've got there. It is quite a nice sculpt on the figure. I do think they were a little bit lazy on these figures though, because it would have been nice to show some variation in the sizes, because Scotty and Kirk are quite a lot sort of fatter in these movies than Spock is, so they could have chunked these out a bit and made them a little bit on the larger side. And also Spock in the movie is never seen wearing this uniform. He's always in his sort of robes, because most of the movie he's not at adult size anyway, he's a child, so it's only at the end of the movie that you see him and he's wearing robes, so you never see him in that uniform. So it's just a bit of a lazy bit of marketing there, that they've just used the same molds for all three figures and think that they can sort of get away with it. But then again, that's what toy lines do. If they want to produce things and they want to produce them cheaply, they've got to reuse as much as they possibly can. And I guess when they weren't sure if these would make any money, it's cheaper just to make one figure with 3 different heads than it is to make 3 separate sculpts for everything. Keeps their costs low, and then if they don't make any money back, they haven't lost anything. Overall, I actually think they're quite a nice set of figures, and as there's only 4 of them in the set, it's quite an easy set to collect. They're not the most common things to sort of see around, and especially with the weapons, those are often lost just because the figures really don't want to hold them, and so a lot of the time I think children just threw them away, or they just got put in a box, because if you want to play with the figures and the guns keep falling out of the hands, it can get quite annoying. And as you've seen with mine, kids do obviously paint things as well, so I'm going to do a little bit of work in future and try and remove some of this paint and get this back to looking how it should do originally. And I'm quite convinced now that Spock has also been painted with a bit of green paint, because I can't believe they would have done such a bad application on these figures. As you can see, I'm getting a small collection here of Star Trek figures. I did used to have all of the motion picture figures, but stupidly over the years I've sold them, so I'm just recollecting them now. And the easiest set of those to get is the first 6 bridge crew, and then all of the aliens after that are much harder to find, so I expect that to be a lot of a long-term job for my collecting thing. But in the meantime, I've managed to get the ERTL section of figures. Now, as I say, ERTL didn't produce many figures, and I can sort of see why. They're not the greatest of figures, but they look lovely, so and that's often all that matters. They do look like they would break as well. Some of the plastic seems quite brittle, so I'm really not going to pose these too much. They're just going to go on display here at toy-polloi, and I'm going to enjoy them for what they are. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of these Star Trek figures. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe to toy-polloi and click the bell to be notified every time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Before I was able to film this episode, I needed to do a little bit of work on Mr. Spock, because he suffered from something that you actually see on G.I. Joe figures quite often, which is the metal little hook that holds the legs together, sort of the hook T-bar thing, that seems to perish, and over sort of the years it then just breaks, and it's really soft. The metal is so soft, in fact you can sort of bend it and it will snap in half. So on Mr. Spock here, that is what has happened. It is snapped and fallen apart. So I've just removed part of it. You can see I've got him in pieces here. There's just one final piece in the top of this leg that needs removing, and luckily, because these are essentially sort of based on the sort of Mego and G.I. Joe style of figures, they're very easy to take apart. You can just sort of unscrew the legs and a little bits of metal come out, and again I'm sort of hopeful that just a replacement to G.I. Joe T-bar will work. I do actually have one from a lanyard figure. I tend to sort of keep bits from broken figures that I take apart. The lanyard ones are actually slightly bigger. This is a replacement G.I. Joe one. You can buy bags of these off eBay. I'm hoping that this will just fit. I've not actually tried this yet. Sometimes these things are maybe a little bit too large or too small. Oh no, that looks like quite a good fit. because obviously this is an ERTL figure, and it's not going to be made by the same factories and the same sort of standards, but actually that just fits quite nicely, so we can just use that to put this together. So I've got the screw here, and the O-ring as well is slightly different. I've noticed the O-ring is a much thicker O-ring. You can see here it's a really thick thing, not like the ones that you get in G.I. Joe figures. It's a sort of thicker build, but it's also in very good condition still, so I'm not going to replace that. I'm just going to put the legs back together like that. We use the original O-ring and we'll get the whole figure sort of screwed together, and then I can get on with filming the proper part of this video, which is the review. So you can see there, that's a nice easy fix. We'll drop the O-ring in, and then we can just slot him back together. It is exactly the same construction as other sort of Mego and G.I. Joe figures, so nice and easy to work with. But this thick O-ring is going to be a little bit of a problem just to get it through the hole on the pelvis. Oh yes, really, that is a really thick O-ring. See if I can hook it through that way. I'll try that one more time. I wonder why they sort of decided to go with this such a thick O-ring. There we go. Hopefully that will just fit in place, which it does, and then it is exactly the same as G.I. Joes and Megos. That hooks over the middle post on the back of the body. Then we can just slot the arms in place and we'll screw that together. And there is Mr. Spock ready to be reviewed. So if you do ever get any of these figures and they have this sort of broken T-bar leg section, then I would recommend just use the G.I. Joe replacement ones. They seem to fit just as well. You can see that actually matches the original ones. I think it might be just slightly wider. You can see there's a slight, his legs are slightly wider than Scotty's there. But that's a pretty close match, and it's probably the best that you'll be able to do. So there you go, that's how you fix poor old broken Mr. Spock. Right, one little extra piece to this video. Once I'd finished filming everything, I did a little bit more research and found out that really I was quite right. I don't think the Klingon monster dog or Spock should have had that green paint on it. So as you can see, I cleaned it off. I used some brake fluid to sort of soak it in. Brake fluid's a great way of removing paint that isn't sort of factory applied. And you can see here most of it's come off the monster dog, and he looks a whole lot better. And if we take a look at Spock here, that looks much better without the green paint on it. It certainly was a bit odd with it on, and it's a very easy process to do. I'll put a link in the description to another video where I have removed the paint using brake fluid, and you'll see how well it works. We can see Spock looks just like he should have done straight out of the packet, and it's a fairly quick process. It takes about an hour to get all of the old paint off, and we ended up with something that looks much more displayable. So there you go. Thanks for watching.